Today, we're talking about a couple that felt like they had enough money to retire early, and they certainly did on paper. But what they didn't know was that they were dangerously close to making costly mistakes that I see happen all too often. And these mistakes had the potential to jeopardize everything they've worked hard for. And that was until we went through this new method that I help people that we work with. I call it the Bulletproof retirement method, and it can help you identify really important financial gaps early so you can take the steps to address them before they become major issues. So let's start and let's meet Michael and Gloria. Not real names, of course, but what's great about Michael and Gloria is that they have enough saved on paper basically to retire in their mid-50s, which is fantastic. And their financials look a lot like a lot of the people that reach out to me. Their expenses are pretty reasonable compared to what they have saved. And typically I start with a balance sheet because that reveals a lot of really important information for me as I start to put together plans for people. They have a home that's beautiful here in California, valued at around $1.8 million. They have a brokerage account that's valued at around $2 million, and we'll get to more on that later because that's a big part of their plan. Their 401k is worth about $1 million combined. They have liabilities of around $385,000, which is basically a mortgage, and they have a small car loan. So that puts their net worth at around $4.8 million. But what's really important for them is what they have in investments as far as what we can create in income. And for that, they have around $3 million in investments that they can expect to retire on. So like many of the people that are nearing retirement naturally start to think about, how are you going to tap into these investments, to create that monthly income? Do you just live off dividend income? Should they just take a smaller percentage of their portfolio and just essentially adjust for inflation over their lifetimes? Or should they do the bucket strategy, buy real estate to get rental, like all these different strategies, or just simply follow the 4% rule? Well, when they came to us, they figured they'd read enough online and they could probably just use the 4% rule. And I don't blame people for this. This is something I see all too often that can lead you, unfortunately, down a path that's a little bit more uncertain. So here's a look essentially at a long-term projection of their plan if we just decide to follow that 4% rule. So essentially, they need $120,000 per year for life and just adjust for inflation over their lifetime. Their plan looks pretty good on paper, right? Now, this is a projection. The blue bar is showing the starting year at $3 million and the expenses of $120,000 per year. And at the end of the plan, they're going to pass away at 95 with around $8 million. And it looks like they have a really high probability of success making this happen. Now, the problem is that many people stop right here because they just aren't aware of how the 4% rule actually works. So let me show you why this approach could be a little bit scary when it comes to legitimate retirement spending. And the main issue I have with following something like the 4% rule is that you get this incredible array of possible outcomes. And what most people are familiar with talking about for retirement income is potential failure, right? You've probably seen an image like this. It has thousands of scenarios run through. It's something we call a Monte Carlo analysis. And what this chart says is basically, hey, let's just follow the 4% rule blindly. You might run out of money, or you might end up tripling or quadrupling your account value. So for many people that we work with, they also consider that a failure. Not as bad as running out of money, of course, but you unknowingly might be putting yourself in a position to forego spending your hard-earned money that you've traded a lot of your time for. The reality is that the 4% rule is like using a flip phone in the age of smartphones. Sure, you can get by with it, but it really lacks the customization of your unique situation, taxes, and really the reality of today. But we can do a little bit better and really narrow down this range by doing one thing. So what we do to make sure they avoid the regret zone, but also really make sure their plan is still bulletproof, we avoid the mistake of relying on a simple 4% rule and instead create a dynamic withdrawal strategy. Because all the 4% rule is just talking about a withdrawal rate. It doesn't account for the question of what specific account do I pull from, what are the taxes involved, what other income sources are at play as far as my retirement income, as well as longevity. What if inflation is different? And most importantly, how do we adjust when, not if, there is a down market? And you can see here with a starting balance of $3 million, with a more dynamic withdrawal strategy, they can spend closer to 4.8% of their portfolio based on the amount of inherent risk in their plan instead of just blindly relying on a rule of thumb. We have a plan for if their portfolio increases, also if their portfolio does decrease during the next bear market. So the first step of my bulletproof retirement method is having a dynamic withdrawal strategy, because the 4% rule is not a strategy. It's just a rule of thumb, and it could be costing you if you follow it for 30 plus years of your retirement. But having a dynamic withdrawal strategy is worthless if you ignore this next part of the method. Now, if we go back to Michael, he worked at a successful company, and over those many years, he was rewarded. In fact, he was rewarded with employer stock for many of those years. And for a lot of the people I talk with, it really helps them retire early. Now, Michael naturally didn't think too much of it while he was planning out his potential retirement. He naturally thought, like many people, this is a massive US company that is almost too big to fail, and it's rewarded him well over the past several decades. And this is a very, very common phenomenon that I see all too often working with clients, and it is known as familiarity bias. For example, the data shows that many Americans are heavily focused on the US stock market. Canadians are primarily invested in their own market, and Australians are primarily invested in their own domestic market. Now, these are just 3 examples of how this works. It really is a trend from country to country, but is that the best investment decision? Well, for most people, they do this because they are familiar with it, and it's because of that familiarity biases, which is also known as the mere exposure effect, and basically the definition that it's a cognitive bias in which people tend to develop a preference for things simply because they are familiar with them. So you're probably starting to see how this relates to our friend Michael, or maybe even your own portfolio. Well, Michael felt like since he had worked at this company and a better understanding of the future performance, and he's familiar with it. Now, that might be very true, and he knows more than the average person. There's more of a problem as he is now approaching retirement. Now, this single stock was more than 30% of their total net worth. Now, here is the dilemma with working with folks in this position. I could look like a genius if I say, hey, Michael, you need to go diversify, and then it decides to crash. But I also would look like an idiot if I tell him to go diversify and the stock went up an additional 30%. But the key to making sure you have that bulletproof retirement is having a portfolio that allows you to hit base hits after base hit rather than home runs. The same risk of this stock dropping 40% while you're working is not the same risk of it dropping 40% while you are retired. That would have been fine 10 years ago, but no longer applies today. And whether you own one employer stock tonight, you could still be overly concentrated in your portfolio. Maybe you're 100% US concentrated, all international. I mean, even the US stock market from 2000 to 2010 had a negative annualized return. And surprisingly, emerging markets was the best performer during that time frame. Now, I don't claim to know the future, but what I do know is that if you follow the second part of my bulletproof method, which is creating a non-biased portfolio that is diversified across multiple asset classes, it can really help stop you from tricking yourself into thinking you're okay, even though you might have some unintended risks that can derail your retirement. But we're not done quite yet. We need to talk about the last part of this bulletproof method. And to show you why this matters, I want to bring up a story from one of the greatest investment managers of all time, Warren Buffett. And he said, my grandfather Ernest never went to business school, but he was a very wise man. In 1939, he gave my father $1,000 to put in a small grocery store. And from this business, it derived a steady income. He always kept a $1,000 bill in his wallet. I asked him, hey, why did he do that? And he told me that one should never leave home without cash because it ensures freedom and peace of mind. And he said, that lesson stuck with me and I've applied it to my investment philosophy ever since. And both personal and business life, cash reserves are crucial for stability and opportunity. It's important to keep your financial house in order so you can be prepared for anything the market throws your way. Now, for Michael and Gloria, they did have an emergency fund. Many of you watching financial YouTube videos in your free time, I would hope have an emergency fund. You know, they were smart to have that in their working years, but retirement is a whole new ball game because you don't have that steady job or income that you once did. And most certainly, most of you, I imagine, do not want to go back to work. But the emergency fund they did have just frankly wouldn't cut it if we decide to hit a bear market, especially based on the income they have. This is why usually, depending on someone's situation, of course, we want to target anywhere from 4 to 5 years of conservative investments in someone's retirement plan. And that's because some bear markets have lasted nearly that long. And I want you to be okay and not have to worry about selling from stocks. Now, we can clearly see why you want to follow this philosophy of holding conservative assets during the great financial crisis. And that's because all of the major asset classes were down except for one, which was treasury bonds. And you do not want to sell from stocks when they are bleeding. That is one of the biggest mistakes I often see when people do want to retire early. They just don't have the insulation to weather a bear market because they just didn't know. This is why the third pillar to bulletproofing your retirement, after having a withdrawal strategy, after diversifying your equity exposure, is setting aside the right amount of conservative investments on the sidelines. So as Warren Buffett says, you are prepared for anything the market throws your way. So here's the last kind of cheesy slide. Be like Mr. Krabs and have cash on the sidelines because you need that protection of principal during those bad years, and you need to be able to insulate yourself from those down markets and help yourself from selling the wrong assets at the wrong time. So once again, this is my method which covers you for the 3 biggest mistakes that can potentially derail your retirement, especially over your lifetime, even though you weren't even intending to make those errors. I often see them happen way too often. And we went through this method to help bulletproof the retirement plan of Michael and Gloria. There is a lot that goes into this, as well as areas beyond just these 3 that we focus on. But hopefully you know that by identifying these financial gaps early, you can take steps to address them before they become a major issue for you. And another major issue for a lot of you when you do retire early is what sort of tax strategy is worth it for you. I made a video ranking some of the most common tax strategies I use with my clients that can give you the biggest bang for your buck, because some of them might just be a waste of your time depending on your situation. So you should definitely watch by clicking this video right here. Once again, this is Matt Calcagno, Certified Financial Planner Advisor over here at 1 Degree Advisors. If you're on the hunt for a financial planner that specializes in retirement planning, this is what we love to do at my firm every day. You can just click the link in the description to talk with me or someone on my team, and I will catch you guys on the next video.